Meanwhile, I live in China, and you live in a society that has zero gun crime. You can go out in a major city like Shanghai, 25, 30 million people, go out at 2 in the morning, have a nice watch on, have cash on you, wear nice clothes. No one's going to bother you.
Meet Cyrus Janssen, an American who lived in mainland China for 7 years and Hong Kong for 3 years. He runs a YouTube channel with over 700k subscribers focused on China. In our chat, Cyrus shared the biggest misconceptions about China in the US,
China,
the future of Chinese-American relations, and what it's like living in China as an American. I'm Chernov, your insider to Expat Life. Zoba.
What do you think the biggest misconceptions about China, let's say, in the US?
The biggest misconceptions would be that China is a place with no freedom. I think many people have a very hard time understanding what China is really like. The most often question that I get asked is, Cyrus, what's China like? And my standard response is, I'll tell you, but you probably won't believe me. And I'd say that because it's unlike anything that you can imagine. And for example, I'll give you another example here. This summer, I took my wife and my 3 children. We went back to China. We traveled for 2 months throughout China. And it was an amazing time because my daughter's 8. I have twin 5-year-old boys, and it was their first time back in China for a long time. And they just couldn't believe it. And we were sharing videos on Instagram with our friends back in America, and no one could believe, like, this is China? Like, this is what China looks like? The roads are this clean, the cities are this good, the malls are this well, the meals are this great, the food is this fresh, the people are this friendly. I can't imagine that this is what China is like. And for many people, this is a sad thing, is that I think for most Americans, their conception of China is still stuck in 1970. It's still Chairman Mao suits, bicycles, poor country, underdeveloped, communism, no freedom, totalitarian society. This is what the stereotypes about China are. But I said, I lived in China for 10 years. There's not really many freedoms that I didn't have. There's not really a huge difference between the United States and China. You could say maybe gun laws. Okay, in America you have the right, Second Amendment, we have the right to own a gun. I'm not an American that owns a gun. I'm not a big fan of guns. It's not my thing. Meanwhile, I live in China, and you live in a society that has zero gun crime. Zero gun crime, right? You can go out in a major city like Shanghai, 25, 30 million people. Go out at 2 in the morning. Have a nice watch on. Have cash on you. Wear nice clothes. No one's going to bother you. You're not going to get jumped. You're not going to get robbed. You're not going to get shot. There's a lot of amazing things about that, and that's kind of what I try to do. I try to say there's always nuances that you need to understand about China that are very different, and you won't understand that until you physically go there and experience it. But I have yet to meet somebody that has physically gone to China and not come away with a very different perception than what the media is presenting to you on a daily basis. What I really enjoyed about being in China in the early days is just the curiosity of Chinese people that very much still exists today. When you're a foreigner in China, the Chinese are very curious about you. They want to know about your country, where you're from, how is life. They're extremely friendly. I remember my first couple months, I couldn't speak any Chinese. I had zero knowledge of the Chinese language. But people, they would see me with, maps again, back in the day, no phones. I'd have a map, I'm trying to find my way, and people would come out and talk to me. They'd help me, and they would help me find my hotel. They would help me find a restaurant. And young children would come up, and their parents would encourage them to, hey, here's a foreigner, speak Chinese or speak English with him. And it was just I immediately felt very welcome there. I knew that I was a guest in China, but I respected them, I respected the culture, and I just had a very overwhelming curiosity. I wanted to learn everything I could about China, about the culture, the people, and I just really, from day one, I just embraced it. I just thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm literally an American living in China. This is the coolest thing ever.
It's a big shift, right?
A tremendous shift.
Florida to China.
Very big, especially from the United States, because many people in the U.S., even moving within the United States is a big deal. I remember my friends at the time, they said, oh, I'm from Florida, but I just got a job opportunity in Texas. I'm so nervous to go to Texas. I don't know what Texas is going to be like. And I always thought, it's more or less the same. It's not that different. But to go to China, it's a complete 180. Everything's different than what you grew up with.
Did you know anything about China before going?
I didn't know anything about China, but I knew was that China was growing. Again, this was circa 2007, so this was about 17 years ago. At that point, China's economy was growing very rapidly, and the only thing that I knew about China was that China is growing. China is going to be a big opportunity. And the thing that interests me was I figured if I could go to China and if I could learn to speak Chinese, I think that this could open up so many doors for my future. And that would be essentially like getting a master's degree. You know, I don't have a master's degree, but when I graduated university, I said, that'll be my master's degree. I'm going to go to China, learn Chinese, and, you know, see what opportunities there are in the world.
And then you learned Mandarin.
I did. So I really committed myself to learning Mandarin because I figured that really would be my ticket. That would be the key thing. And, you know, the most important thing, I think, when you learn another language, especially as an expat, it helps establish yourself in that country. You know, it really shows local people, okay, this guy has committed himself to really being here. You know, I remember a lot of expats, they would come to China and they say, hey, I'm going to come on a very wealthy expat contract. I'm going to make as much money as I can for 2 years, and then I'm getting the hell out of here because I don't want to be here long term. And I always thought that's such a short-sighted viewpoint. I wanted to really experience China. And if you don't understand that language, and you don't need to be fluent, but you need to, if you can even understand a few words and at least have some interaction, it brings a very different perspective to your journey. And then of course, if you really want to live there long term, being able to speak Chinese and handle your daily business as far as paying bills, you know, buying real estate, investing, you know, just daily life. I mean, Chinese became my working language by about my third year in China, where every day I'd go to work and I'd speak Chinese 8 to 12 hours a day. And it was my working language for many years.
My daughter speaks Chinese, but she's 7.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about her level. At school they say that she's fine as not a native speaker in Chinese.
Right.
But I cannot, like, I need someone to actually like check on her, like if she really speaks Chinese.
Learning Chinese has been a superpower for me. I mean, it really has opened up a tremendous amount of doors. And I think, for example, I'll give you a great example, and this is for anybody watching this, is I think in life when you can take 2 skills and pair them together, that really becomes a very attractive thing. Let me give you an example. So my first job in China, I was actually a golf professional. So when I was at university in Florida, I played golf. I played it at a very high level, and so I had an opportunity to become a golf coach in China. So I have the golf knowledge. So you know, that's an advanced skill. But now pair that with being able to speak Chinese. Now there's not many people, especially in 2007, 2008, there was not many foreigners in China that could teach golf at a high level and then also speak Chinese. And so all of a sudden, now I'm one of a handful of people in all of China that has that skill set. And so by my second year in China, I became the busiest golf coach at our facility. And I had so many students that would come because I was American, I could speak Chinese, and I knew how to teach golf. And so that became a superpower for me. And that really also led to me getting my next job, because I then, after 2 years at working at a golf academy, I was 25 years old and I had the opportunity to become the head golf professional at China's #1 private club. Now, for some comparison, maybe for those of you that don't understand golf, the head pro is a very high position in the industry. In Western countries, you know, that would be something that you would need to work maybe 10, 15 years. You know, you have to work to get to that level. So that would be really maybe you're 35 to 40 years old, you would get the opportunity to have that job, and only after 10 to 15 years of very hard work. But in China, you're able to accelerate your career much faster. So after 2 years, and at the age of 25, I was given the opportunity to become the head golf professional at China's #1 golf course. And the sole reason that I got that job was because I could speak Chinese. And the general manager at the time was from Singapore, and he said, Cyrus, you know, we're speaking in English, and he said, I heard that you can speak Chinese. If you can speak Chinese with me, I'll give you this job. And so I said, 那没问题啦，我们说中文吧. You know, I said, no problem, let's speak Chinese then. And so we spoke Chinese for about 5-6 minutes, and he said, wow, you're really confident. He's like, why do you think that you can do this job? And I said, look, I've been preparing for this moment. I've been learning Chinese every day. And I was relentless in the early days. I was 23 years old. I'd be Friday nights, I would be in my apartment reading books on Chinese. I would then go out in the morning and I would talk to I'd go to the grocery store and buy my groceries, and I'd ask everybody, how do you say this? I'd walk down the streets constantly practicing, my spoken Chinese. And it became a hobby, but it also was a passion. You know, I really want to be able to speak really good Chinese. I really want to do this job.
Yeah.
And that's how it opened a door. And again, it got me my next job, and it's gotten me other business opportunities, and it's opened many doors simply by learning a language.
I think the majority of expats, they go to the places like Thailand,
Yeah.
or Singapore if you're like expat, have highly paid job,
Right.
or you go to Thailand or even Malaysia.
Yeah.
Here you can totally live in a bubble, in
Yes.
a very comfort bubble, and you can make friends with locals as well,
Yeah.
but you don't really need to learn the language, and
Correct.
you will be perceived as the foreigner, and it's fine.
Yes.
People are like so many foreigners, let's say, living in Bangkok,
Yeah.
so you'll be fine there.
Yeah.
And for China, it's different. You kind of have to be integrated.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some expats that, you know, come live in Shanghai and Beijing and these very big expat communities and don't speak Chinese. But I
Yeah.
think you fail to understand a very important element of the culture. And I think there's a really famous Nelson Mandela quote that I love, is when you speak to a man in a language that he understands, you know, it goes to his head. But if you speak to a man in his native tongue, it goes to his heart. And so, you know, when you really are able to communicate with the Chinese and you start understanding, you know, there's a phrase in Chinese that's, you know, 我心里不舒服, which means like my heart's not comfortable. And it's an interesting phrase because, for example, you know, I remember when I bought my apartment in Shanghai, you know, we were negotiating with the, you know, with the seller. And I was like, yeah, I want to offer you this price. And he's just like, oh, wow, 这个太低了, you know, 这个价格太低了, 我心里不舒服. It's like the price is too low. My heart's not feeling good on this. And you know, you wouldn't understand like what that means unless you understand Chinese. And I was just like, all right, like I get it, like 心里不舒服. I'm like, well, let's negotiate the price. What about this price? You know, I think this is still a fair price for you, but you know, I need a little bit of a discount. You know, 你心里舒服吗? You know, it's like, is your heart comfortable now? And it's like, okay, 心里舒服, let's do the deal. You know, so it was. I remember that negotiation, and I'm like, that's such a. If you're translating that, you know, I can tell you, okay, my heart's comfortable. It doesn't really translate as well. That's the direct translation in English, but it kind of has a different meaning in Chinese. And so when you can kind of understand that, now I made the deal, and then I, you know, kind of put my hand around him. I'm like, oh, 我心里也很舒服. You know, like my heart's comfortable too now. Right? Like you're happy, I'm happy. You know, you're going to give me a blessing of this house, and you know, we're both walking away from a good deal. So I remember that very distinctly. That, you know, example of buying a house and, you know, having that cultural element involved in that as well.
What was the attitude towards you as an American, like from Chinese people?
In the 17 years that I've been traveling to China, even right now in 2024, I have experienced nothing but positive energy, positive comments from every single Chinese person I've ever met. I've never had a single bad experience. And I think what's so fascinating is that, you know, there's actually a little bit of an advantage to being American. I remember, for example, when I was that golf coach at the academy, you know, we had somebody from Scotland, Canada, New Zealand, China, and America. I would get lessons. People would come in and say, oh, look at all of these flags. I want the American guy.
Yeah.
Now, I wasn't maybe the best coach, but people wanted the American. They wanted me. So I had an advantage of just being American. And I remember people, people were always fascinated to learn more about your country. And the interesting thing is that Chinese people know much more about America than Americans know about China. So, you know, their knowledge, even, I mean, go into a taxi in Shanghai and start speaking with the driver. You'll be, and if you tell him I'm from America, you'll be amazed at what he knows. For example, I mean, we're less than 40 days from the U.S. election. He'd be like, oh, you know, we've got, you know, Donald Trump or Kamala. I've been watching your election. What's your thoughts on that? And I mean, they're right up to speed. They know exactly what's going on. They're following world events. They're much more knowledgeable about the world around them, much more than Americans are.
Growing in the US and Florida, how's your perception towards your country changed towards the US or maybe Americans? Or you as an American changed through the years?
Sure. I mean, I think that it's a very good question because in America you have two types of people. You have the vast majority of people have never left the United States. And the vast majority of Americans don't have a passport. And unfortunately, they live in a bubble. They live in a bubble because they don't understand the world around them. Yeah. Give an example. We share a 4,000-mile border with Canada. And my wife is Canadian. We lived in Canada for 5 years. I'm a naturalized Canadian citizen as well. I have a great passion for Canada. It's a great country. What's incredible is that most Americans could not name the capital of Canada. Okay, the capital is Ottawa. I ask most Americans, they'll tell you it's Toronto, because they have no knowledge of anything in Canada. We learn nothing about Canada. Our closest trading partner, in Canada, we always look at the United States as a bigger brother. Yeah, I mean, we have an amazing relationship between the United States and Canada, but growing up in America, we learn nothing about Canada. Meanwhile, in Canada, everybody learns a lot about the United States because it's the big country just to the south of you. So you have Americans that have never left the country, that know very little about outside of America. And then you have Americans like myself who've had the opportunity to go abroad. And again, that, having a German mother and going abroad, going to Europe every summer, spending time learning other languages, other cultures, that fundamentally shifted my mind and how I look at things. And I don't think you can really understand your home country until you leave and you look at it from the outside looking in. That is a tremendous thing. Now, you can do that on a holiday. You can get a little bit of perspective, but I think the ultimate experience is if you can be an expat. Yeah. And if you can at least live abroad for at least a year, just to get to understand what life is really like in a different country. Because once you become an expat, you're paying your electric bill, you have to find a place to rent or buy, you have to, go to the hospital, you have to figure out how do you function in a society, as opposed to just staying a week in a nice hotel on a beach. Yeah. So I think once you go abroad, you can look at it in a very different light. And I think the United States, what I've seen is that, unfortunately, our reputation on the international stage is declining. I think it's declining very significantly. And unfortunately, most Americans don't realize that because, again, the majority live in a bubble. Yeah. They live in a bubble and they don't know what's going on outside of the United States. In their mind, America is the best country in the world. Why would I leave? Why would I get a passport? But you don't know what you don't know. I mean, if you do, how can I tell you that, we're filming this live in Kuala Lumpur? It's a world-class city. We're world-class hotels at an amazing rate. I mean, it's, you don't know these things until you travel and experience that. So I think if any Americans are watching this and you've not had the chance to travel or, go abroad, I mean, my number one piece of advice for every young American, hey, like me, 23 years old, take that chance. Go live abroad. You have nothing to lose and it will fundamentally change everything for the rest of your life.
How was the relationships between the US and China back then?
Actually, I remember very well because I arrived in China in January 2007. Yeah. And if you remember, in 2008, actually Beijing hosted the Olympics. And that was an amazing time. I was there on the ground in Beijing. It was an incredible time for China. That was really China's coming out party. That was really China announcing to the world, we have arrived, our economy is booming, the Chinese are here. And I never forget, George Bush, who was president at the time, he flew to Beijing and he was in the stands at the Olympics, cheering on Michael Phelps in the swimming pool. And it was such an iconic scene because you see him surrounded by USA flags, Chinese people around him as well. Yeah. And you just could never imagine a US president doing that today in 2024, given the tension between US and China. But in 2008, it was a different time. Tensions between the US and China were relatively low. There was a lot of trade going on between. There was a tremendous amount of business, and it really was a very prosperous time for both countries.
Yeah. Trade is still going, but the relationships are quite sour right now.
Yeah, it's tough to see. I mean, China and the United States are linked at the hip. Their economies are so intertwined. Yes. Many people don't realize how important China is to the United States economy and just to how Americans live their average life. Yeah. Without China, we couldn't function. And so the trade still goes on, although the tensions have ramped up significantly since that time.
Do you think it will improve at some point? What's your prediction for the next 5-10 years?
As far as tensions, I think that, unfortunately, if I had to make a prediction, I think that they're going to increase. I think that we're going to see more tensions between the United States and China. But we're going to see this increase because there's a fundamental problem happening in the United States where we are experiencing a very difficult time politically in the United States. The U.S. democracy has never been weaker than at this moment right now. So our government has a tremendous amount of internal problems. And the problem right now is that we're distracted by other countries. For example, you'll often hear many U.S. politicians say the greatest threat to the future of the United States is China. But in reality, it's nothing to do with China. Everything is by looking in the mirror. The biggest threat to the United States is the United States itself. And they need to figure out what do we want our politics to look like? How do we fix our own house? And on the flip side, China has many problems as well. The Chinese economy here in 2024 is very different than when I was in China in 2013, 2014. That economy has matured a lot. Right now we're seeing, for example, record high youth unemployment. We're seeing a real estate market that has matured. Again, when I bought my apartment in 2009, I sold that then in 2015. That was a period of rapid growth. I made about a 400% profit on that investment only because of timing. Because at that time, China's real estate industry was booming.
Yeah.
But now it's very matured, right? The market is very matured, and China's economy is becoming more mature as well. So I think that what you're going to see between the United States and China is you're going to see China continuing its influence around the world. For example, when we look at Africa, we look at other countries in Asia, many of them are shifting towards China. I think that the United States is going to, continue wanting to sanction China, wanting to impose trade tariffs, wanting to limit Chinese technology. And we're going to see this continuous battle for the next few years. It's not going to go down, unfortunately.
Are you, overall, you positive about the future of the world, or negative or neutral?
An optimist. I'm always an optimist. So I will always say that I'm positive about the future of the world. And I always say this, is I don't believe that the United States and China will get involved in a confrontation. I don't believe that they will go to war, because I don't think many people understand this, is that if the United States and China get involved in a hot war, that is the end of the economy. That is the end of the world. All right, that literally will wreck every stock market, all of the industries. I mean, we're talking absolute chaos for the entire globe. No country will be unscathed from that wrath if the United States and China get into a hot war. I do think that both sides understand that. Now, there's going to be, both sides are going to flex muscles. They're both going to say things. For example, the United States government right now is heavily investing in Australia, building U.S. military bases, adding supplies there in preparation for a war with China. They're actively doing that right now.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that it's going to come to that. I do believe in humanity. I do believe that at the end of the day, that cooler heads will prevail and that peace will happen. I do believe that.
So if China will take Taiwan at some point, there will be no hot response from...
Yeah, I mean, this is the question, right? This is the question is what Taiwan, right? That is the whole question that really encompasses the entire United States-China relationship. And you go back to an earlier question you asked me, how was the U.S.-China relationship in 2007, 2008? It was very good because Taiwan was not an issue at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, Taiwan was no factor at all between the United States and China. Yeah. So there's a direct correlation. Once escalations continue with Taiwan, then that's when the United States and China relationship will start to deteriorate. But it starts a lot with, for example, our media. For example, if you watch news programs, it'll say tensions are increasing over Taiwan, an area which China believes is part of its own territory. Now, the way that the news says that's incorrect, because it's not only China that says that Taiwan's part of China, it's actually the United States government. It's actually the vast majority of countries around the world. Every Western country around the world, agrees with that, that Taiwan is part of China. It's a fundamental belief. Go ask any U.S. government official, that's the official stance. We believe in the One China policy. And the One China policy has fundamentally guided the U.S.-China relationship for the past 50 years. Now, I'll share my thoughts on, will China invade Taiwan? I think that they will not. I'm predicting that they will not, and there's a few reasons for that. Number one is that you have to remember is that Chinese people look at Taiwan as their brothers. Okay, this is not an independent country. This is not somewhere else. They speak the same language. Okay, between the Fujian province, which is the closest province across the strait, to Taiwan, these are brothers. These are families that are separated by, that they travel back and forth. Many people come over from Taiwan. Many people go from China to Taiwan. This is a brotherhood. This is family. So I don't think you're going to see China just all of a sudden go in military and start killing civilians, start bombing, the life in Taiwan. The other thing is that it would fundamentally erase everything that China's government has achieved in the past 50 years.
Yeah.
That's something that really needs to be said, because in the past 50 years, we have not seen a country rise like China. 50 years ago, China was the biggest country in the world in terms of population, and it was also the poorest. That's not a good fact, right? It's the biggest population and the poorest country. And over the past 50 years, you have to give credit where credit's due. This is not me singing the praises of the Chinese government, nor is it me supporting the Chinese government. I'm very neutral. You can hate China's government or you can love it. That's your opinion. But what you can't argue is the simple facts is that over the past 50 years, China has transformed itself. Okay? 700 million people have been lifted out of poverty. Over the last 30 years, 80% of the world's poverty alleviation has come directly from China. In fact, if you remove China's efforts to poverty alleviation, we would be in a negative state. Right? The world would have not actually increased. We would have gotten more poor if it weren't for China. These are the simple facts. And I think when you look at China, is that they have basically sold this idea to the Chinese people that said, look, we are going to be a one-party state. We have this direction. We have this goal that we're going to move towards. And if you go along with that, you're going to experience this economic success, which has been the case for the last 50 years. Again, like I mentioned, there's certainly economic challenges right now, but every mature country goes through that. I'm reminded of my home country, the United States, 2008, massive financial crisis, tremendous amount of turmoil in our markets, retirement accounts, real estate for over 2 years. So every country goes through those, periods where there's, corrections. But I think what is very difficult is that I just think if China were to invade Taiwan, it would really screw that entire thing up. And I just don't think that's a risk that they're willing to take. However, I will preface this is that it really is, the ball is in the United States court. And the reason I say that is that if the United States continues to recognize the one China policy, I don't think that there's going to be an issue. But if you get some Republicans that are very, very anti-China, many Republicans have said, we need to shift away from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity. We need to call Taiwan an independent country. We need to invite them into the United Nations. We need to recognize them as an independent state. And I don't care what China says. If you have US politicians moving in that direction, and then Taiwan signs on to that, then there will be a hot war. Because China will go to war to defend that country. People need to understand, Taiwan is the fundamental, it's the cornerstone of China's foreign policy. Yeah. It is the single most important thing. When Henry Kissinger went to China, he had an entire list of things to speak with Zhou Enlai, the Chinese premier at the time. Zhou Enlai had one. You want a relationship with us? It starts with Taiwan. That's the fundamental thing. You don't agree to that, the entire deal's off the table. That is our red line. That is our deal breaker. So we agreed to it. We agreed to it, and again, it's been the fundamental principle guiding U.S.-China relations for the past 50 years. So if you see U.S. politicians shift, and all of a sudden you say, you know what? Let's imagine Kamala Harris, for example. Hey, day one, I'm the new U.S. president. And guess what? We are now recognizing Taiwan as an independent country, and we're putting them in the United Nations. And there's nothing China can do about that. You see escalation like that from the United States, China 100% will respond. So that's why I say it really is, the ball is in the United States court. As long as we figure out a way to maintain this peace in Taiwan, I think that there will be peace.
You mentioned about ambiguity versus the clarity.
Yeah.
I think what's the cultural difference in the US, Americans tend to be very clear with their messages. And Asia approach is a bit different.
Correct.
You can be in the gray zone and
Yes.
it's fine. So I think it's also the mindset is different.
Right.
Even on the level of business communication.
Right.
I read studies about it. So
yeah.
Americans give you a lot of context.
Right.
They never give you you need to figure out yourself.
Right.
I give you all the context. And in China, no, you need to understand the context.
Correct.
Yeah.
100% correct. High context and low context.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The idea of your channel is to build bridges
Yeah.
between China and the US. Idea of my channel is actually I started with also building bridges idea, but between locals and foreigners living in Singapore first, and then we expanded to different other countries. Do you think your channel actually helps to, or you see the signs that your channel helps to improve the relations, or people change their opinions, let's say Americans change their opinions about China?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the most rewarding things about running a YouTube channel and speaking objectively about this is I've met a lot of fans. I mean, when I was living in Vancouver, Canada, for example, there's a tremendous Chinese community. I would get a tremendous amount of Chinese Canadians. Many of them that had never been to China. They're ethnically Chinese, but they grew up in Vancouver, Canada.
Yeah.
But they say, hey, we watch your YouTube channel. Thank you for speaking out for China. Thank you for speaking out for Chinese people. Thank you for promoting peace. Thank you for being, a peace advocate. I remember I was in Shanghai for a business trip last summer, and I was checking into the hotel, and an American man a foreigner walked by me, and he stopped, and then he turned over and he said, Cyrus, you're Cyrus Janssen. I watch your YouTube channel. Thanks for what you do.
Yeah.
I'm here on this business trip in China because I watch your YouTube channel. So I've had amazing experiences like that. I mean, we're here in Malaysia for the Nomad Capitalist event. I had fans reach out to me yesterday in person, come up, hey, I watch your YouTube channel. Thank you for what you do. And so I think what's interesting is what we try to do is we try to provide the nuance. Some of my most successful videos is me simply walking around China, just showing you. I was in Guangzhou, for example, and I said, I'm here next to the Sacred Heart Cathedral. It's one of the oldest cathedrals in China.
Yeah.
And incredibly, there's mass held here at this Catholic cathedral 4 times a day in English, Mandarin, Korean, and Cantonese. And a lot of people were like, I just never would even imagine that a church could exist in China. And I said, not only does it exist, but you have 4 different languages you can attend mass in, if up to you. So it's just more about providing that context and trying to help you understand. I think the other point, Max, I want to say is, since I've now relocated back to the United States to be closer with my parents and my family, and I was a little bit worried because I wondered what Americans would perceive of when I tell them, hey, I'm a YouTuber. Here's my channel about China. Yeah. And in the 2 years that I've been back in the United States, I've received nothing but positive feedback. I've received even so many parents at my school who have said, we don't know anything about China. We just think it's bad because that's what our media tells me. But if you guys, you lived there for 10 years, like you have a whole YouTube channel about it, like I'll watch some of your videos. I'd love to learn more about this. I think there's a fundamental shift happening in China right now, or I should say, not in China, but around the world, where people are changing their perceptions about China. And social media is a big part of that. You've seen earlier this year, in the last 6 months specifically, China has opened up visa-free tourism. So for many Europeans, many in the EU, they're now visa-free to China. Australia, New Zealand, visa-free to China. And as a result, many of these YouTube travel vloggers are coming to China for the first time. And they're showing their experiences. And so we've seen a plethora of new videos hit the YouTube market, all of them being my first 24 hours in China, not what I expected. And everyone sharing their thoughts. And overwhelming, again, it goes back to that principle that if you actually spend time in China and experience it, it's very different than what you've heard about. Yeah. And so that's my biggest thing is, you cannot hate China unless you have at least given it a try. You have to come and experience it, and I'm sure you'll walk away with a very different opinion and point of view by doing so.
From the business standpoint, what your YouTube channel means for your business right now? Is the platform that kind of generates your attention and leads? And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, YouTube for me has transformed into very much a business. I mean, we run this full time. It's been an incredible opportunity for me to, leverage into many different speaking engagements, many different business opportunities. So in the past 12 months alone, I've been to Shanghai, I've been to Istanbul, Turkey. I've been here in Malaysia this week. I've actually next month I'm going to Azerbaijan. Going to be meeting with the United Nations is doing a big climate change conference there. We're going to be going there to cover that. Yeah. I'm going to Abu Dhabi at the end of the year, talking about Chinese investment and projects there. So it's basically become a great pipeline to speaking engagements, to business opportunities. And again, what I always say is I really started this YouTube channel. I had a secondary goal. I thought if I could make a YouTube channel about China, it could probably keep my door open to the country. And I guarantee you that maybe at one point I'm going to get invited to go back to China. Well, that was my goal when I first started. When I had 0 subscribers, I had this idea. Yeah. If I can figure out this YouTube game, I could probably get like a deal to go back to China and make videos. And last summer, the dream became a reality. I had a Norwegian factory owner in China reach out to me and say, Cyrus, we want you to come to our factory here in China. It's on the outskirts of Wuxi, and we want you to make a video showing our textile factory to the world. And I was so excited because I thought, wow, this is incredible. I have an opportunity to go back to China. I filmed that video, and that video has done almost 1 million views now. And it's like inside a Chinese factory. And that video has been it's probably my favorite video that I've ever made on my YouTube channel because it means something very special to me. Because I remember having 0 subscribers and having this idea. If I can start something about China, this could become a YouTube channel that becomes my brand, that becomes part of me, becomes my business, becomes my mission, and it will always keep me connected back to China. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And that's exactly what's happened. And so I'm just, I wake up every day extremely grateful for the opportunity. Getting the chance to meet you, Max. I mean, I've been a big fan of your channel. I love the expat life. Obviously, my decision to become an expat has fundamentally changed the entire trajectory of my life. So I love your mission of sharing that story and helping more people, around the world understand what it's like to be an expat. So
Thanks
because of YouTube, we're here together. You know, and that's
yeah,
it's very
exactly.
great.
Yeah, we're speaking at this conference in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, because of our YouTube channels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this interview right now, because of YouTube. So it's been a incredible blessing that just keeps getting better, and I just am extremely grateful.
Do you have a strategy behind growing your YouTube channel?
The biggest thing is make good content. You know, is the biggest thing is that what I want people to understand, especially if you're a YouTuber and you're wanting to start out, is that in the early stages, it's about quantity, not quality. Right? When you're starting off at zero, you need to be producing a lot of videos. You need to get better at your craft. You need to be putting out a lot of videos to try to get some traction. Once you have an audience established, you can refine your skills. You can figure out what's been successful. You know, for example, if this video does very well because it's an American speaking about life in China, well then double down. Go find another American that lives in China and do another interview, right? You kind of double down on successful videos. Yeah. If it's worked once, it'll probably work again. If you have a thumbnail that's done very well, do it again, use it again. So you'll often see is that we'll have, in my channel, if you go through all my videos, you'll see similarities between thumbnails because this video is done very well. Well, we're just going to slightly modify it as far as the thumbnail, and because it's already been proven to be successful.
Yeah.
So those are some of the best practices, and I think it's YouTube is about storytelling. Max, you do a great job because that's essentially your whole channel is telling stories, interviews. Also, I think what's interesting to know with YouTube is that it shifts very much because, for example, this is a long form video. This video is going to be almost probably an hour long by the time it gets published. Those long form videos, they weren't very popular maybe 5 years ago on YouTube, but now it's very popular on YouTube, along with the opposite of that, shorts, which is under 60 seconds. So you have a tremendous amount of opportunity on YouTube because you can create 60-second shorts. You can do 1-hour interviews. You can do 3-hour podcasts. You can do 4-hour live streams. Or you can do kind of what I do. My bread and butter is a 10 to 15 minute dedicated video about a specific topic. There's so many different options on YouTube. And it's really about finding, what works for you, what's popular with your audience. And for me, it's really trying to tell these interesting stories.
By the way, if that's the message of Cyrus resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to Cyrus' channel, subscribe to this channel, Max Chernov, if you're watching for some reason without subscription. Some people do. It's not polite to do it, so better subscribe. I actually always tell, because I have this YouTube program, so I always tell my students, you should actually have just your phone, clip mic, costs $50, and the sunlight, and that's it. And the idea and the intention to share your thoughts with the world.
Correct.
That's it. That's how you start on YouTube.
100% agree. I mean, I remember my very first YouTube video about China. I was very frustrated about this news report, and I literally just sat down in my office. And if you go back to my early channel, you can see it. And it's, the office is a mess. I've got shirts on the floor. The camera quality is terrible, but the message was there, right? It was like a 6-minute video, but the message was on point. And so, I think there's a big, you've really hit the nail on the head where there's a big misconception. Oh, I need to have thousands of dollars of equipment. I need to have a studio. I need to have this. I need to have that. No, you could walk down the street with your camera and you can make a viral video if the content's good. If you're really speaking to your audience and you're hitting on a pain point or you're talking about something that's of interest, people watch it.
Yeah, definitely. We actually have this 3-day free workshop where we teach how to actually start, grow and monetize YouTube channel. We put the link in the description.
Nice.
And basically, we explain everything what niche can you go for and the potential of monetization, what equipment do you need, how to beat the algorithm, how to gain your first 1,000 subscribers. So all the basics. So we put the link in the description if you sign up, if you feel like it.
Fantastic.
Do you have some very important principle in your life that you develop through the years? Let's say you live in China, in the US, growing your career, something really important, maybe something that you will teach your kids when you get a bit older.
I think my one fundamental belief that really has guided me a lot is to be the change you want to see in the world. It's very, very simple. Be the change you want to see in the world. So, I want to see a change between the US and China. Maybe I'm too small. Maybe I'm just one person. Maybe I can't really influence this, but I'm going to go try. I'm going to try to be that change that I want to see in the world. I don't believe that China is the greatest threat to the United States. That is something that I'm going to, die on. It's a fundamental belief of mine, and it's something that I'm going to continue to preach on. Yeah. So when I talk to people, when I speak in conferences around the world, when I speak to, anybody from the side of the street, I went in a local pharmacy, and there was two guys talking about China. Oh, China's taking all our jobs. You know, there's no manufacturing in America anymore because China. You know, China's the problem. And I thought, well, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, what phone do you have? Oh, I have an iPhone. Oh, okay. Well, if we bring that factory back to America, okay, we're going to have to hire Americans for about $50 to $60 an hour because they won't work for less than that in a factory. They don't want to do that job. So are you willing to pay $5,000 to $6,000 for an iPhone? $5,000 to $6,000, that's insane. Well, exactly. That's why we need China, because there's also a fundamental reason why Apple has gone to China is because they're able to produce the best quality phones at the best prices, and they do so because it's China. China's doing that. And as a result, you know, Apple's become one of the most valuable companies in the world. So if anything, just go buy some Apple stock and enjoy that tangible, you know, benefits that comes from dealing with China. But yeah, I would say be the change you want to see in the world. You know, and start, and that really, and even if, you know, again, maybe I can't help the US-China on this perspective, but even if that means being a leader in my local community, helping more people, if I can help one person better understand China and relieve those fears and just encourage them to maybe go to China, experience it, then that'll be a success. And I've had many of that happen. I had one last example. I had a mother who said her daughter was 19. She was scared to go to China. I said, you need to go and experiencing it. She was actually part of an orchestra. And so she went and she toured through China. She had so much fun. She said, I'm going to actually move to China and get a job there. She's now in her second year. And she said, Cyrus, because of your email, I had the courage to go to China. I went on an orchestra tour, and now here I am 2 years later, and I'm now living in China, and I'm living my expat dream, all because of an email that you sent back to us. That stuff like that, you know, makes all the work that I do on YouTube worth everything.
What's the meaning of life for you?
I think the meaning of life just goes to the golden rule. You know, I mean, I'm a believer in Jesus, and I think Jesus said, you know, do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And I think as I've traveled around the world, I've traveled to over 60 countries. Again, I have not found any country, any religion, any society, any civilization anywhere on the planet that does not agree with that law, right? You treat others the way that you want to be treated. And again, I mean, I've had people, you know, say negative comments towards me, like, how could you even go to China? You know, China's a communist country. How could you even visit there? And I say, well, because China's filled with 1.4 billion amazing people there, right? Yeah. I mean, just because I go to China doesn't mean that I agree with everything that the government does. We need to separate that, right? Just because I say, I love China, I love Chinese food, I love Chinese culture, I love Chinese people, doesn't mean that I'm a communist, right? So I think, honestly, the best thing for everybody is be the change you want to see in the world and treat others the way that you want to be treated.